A lot of Eagles news to get into. NFL free agency. The doors are almost open, Johnny Mack, and there's so many things to start with today. But I guess we'll go with the Foles news, which a lot of people have speculated the Jags would be the place, and it appears that by the end of the week, those people will be accurate.
Well, you can't sign till March 13th. March 11th is the legal tampering period. But, yeah, we've kind of talked about it a lot. I didn't think the market was really going to be as developed as at least some people thought for Nick, for a number of reasons, fair or not. You know, a lot of people obviously in Philadelphia think very highly of him as a player. Outside, there's more questions. Is he a system quarterback? Will he be a fit? And then you go to the Combine last week, and the Giants kind of gave the vote of confidence to Eli Manning again, which I think surprised many people. The Raiders gave a vote of confidence to Derek Carr. The Redskins are looking in different directions. So all of a sudden you say, well, where's he going to go? And there's only one spot that really, really wants him, and that's Jacksonville. And I think that's where he's going to be.
How does he fit in Jacksonville? A lot of people have been talking about that they want to be a downfield type of team, and that's something that he excels at that. He can throw the deep ball. But do you see him as a good fit? Do you think he'll be a success there? Or does this story ultimately, this fairy tale, not turn out too good for Nick?
Well, I think he's in a good position because John DeFilippo's now down there, and John already knows him and kind of understands the kind of offense he has to be in. So I think that's a positive. It's still a very, very talented team from a defensive standpoint. And so that will be helpful. And remember how close they were to the Super Bowl a couple years ago before falling back. So they do have some significant talent. They have a running back. We'll see if they, with Leonard Fournette, we'll see how it develops. But I think there's a chance he could be successful. And I think that's one of the best places for him. I think the other place would have been the Giants, quite honestly, because of Saquon Barkley and Odell Beckham, and having that kind of skill position talent around them. But if you were sort of rating the places, those would be the two top places for him. So I think Jacksonville's one of them. So he'll be able to sink or swim with a coach that knows him and a pretty good defense. So that's kind of all you can ask for.
Yeah, some reports out there that Foles will, sign with the Jaguars. That can't be official until the 11th. However, it looks like all signs pointing that he will go that way. Let's jump down the next item of business. Saturday was Kelce. He got an $11 million deal, though. There was some talks that he might retire. He didn't retire. He turned into the highest-paid center in the league.
Yeah, and I reported back in January on 973ESPN.com when those rumors first developed that this is what it was about. It was about an extension because on his prior deal, Jason's guaranteed money had run out. So he had 2 more years left on the deal, but the guaranteed money was done. So he was going to want an extension. He was going to want some guaranteed money. He was going to want that issue alleviated. And he was also coming off a season where he had a lot of injuries. He fought through a knee injury for the majority of the year. Then he hurt his elbow. So it was very difficult on him. And if the Eagles didn't step up to the table, maybe he would have said, you know what, I'm done. But the Eagles love him. He's the best center in football. They had been working with an extension in mind through the season. And it was always going to get done. And he's the best center in football. He deserves to be paid like the best center in football. And that's kind of what happened.
Mike brought up a good point earlier, John, about Brandon Graham particularly, but in football, when these guys get older, I think it's challenging for the front office to decide when to cut ties. And the Eagles have been very loyal recently, I believe, with certain players. And that's a good thing. It also can be a bad thing. Do you disagree with how they've been operating so far at all? And do you anticipate any moves that you may disagree with?
Well, there's always going to be moves you disagree with. As far as extending Jason Kelce, I think that was a no-brainer. I've advocated the re-signing of Brandon Graham, and I said before, if they didn't, that would be a mistake. I mean, the guy has played at a tremendously high level. That's the strength of their defense, is the defensive line. And the two players that sort of make that hum are Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham. So ultimately, I think it was a pleasant surprise. They brought him back because he was going to make a lot of money on the open market, probably in the 13, 14 million range. So they probably got a little bit of a hometown discount. And that's sort of the kind of stuff you chalk up in the win column. But you're right. I mean, and our friend Jeff Mosher reported, they possibly could be trading Michael Bennett. There's another player who's going to be 34 in November next year. And that's more of the guy you would look at and say, he was phenomenal last year. But how long is it going to last? How long can he play at that level, turning 34 years old? And I think the Eagles are having that conversation for a number of reasons. And one of them is, and I just tweeted out, if you remember, before Derek Barnett got hurt last year, Barnett was the starter and Bennett wasn't happy. And he wasn't getting enough reps. He didn't like it. He was used to playing a lot more in Seattle. And he was right. He's a better player than Derek Barnett. But that's sort of the difficult decision. It's you have a lot of confidence in Barnett, who's a young player. You think he's going to develop. And the Eagles let him play a lot last season before the injury, even though Michael Bennett was better. I think the plan would be for that again this year. So maybe you be a little proactive. Maybe you shop Michael Bennett and look to move on, because if you have four defensive ends and three of them are plus 30, because remember, Chris Long is in this equation as well, at some point, you probably want to get a little bit younger.
Yeah, take us a little bit deeper into, Mosher's report here about Bennett. I mean, does that make you kind of broke it down a little bit, because I brought up Derek Barnett when we were talking about this before you came on, John, was you just signed Graham to 3 years. You're getting Bennett back. He was a first-round pick. He's going into the third season and has done really nothing of any substance. Some of it's not his own fault, the playing time, then an injury, and now if I see Bennett's here and Graham again, I almost feel like I'm back to square one with a guy that I invested a first-round pick in.
Well, I don't. In fact, you would talk to certain Eagles fans, and they would tell you Derek Barnett was turning into a star, and that's kind of what I said last year. No, he was not playing that well before the injury. Bennett was clearly the better player. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing for a sophomore in the NFL not to be as good as Michael Bennett. That's not an insult. But the Eagles thought long-term it was important to get him on the field, and he became the starter. And I think we're going to revert back to that at the start of next season. They want Derek Barnett to be the starter opposite Brandon Graham. You want Chris Long back, but the only way Chris Long comes back is if he has a clearly defined role as a third down pass rusher. And if you have all that and Michael Bennett, well, then Bennett's not going to be happy. So that's where the Eagles know that. They had it. That's exactly what was going on at the beginning of last season, before the injury opened up the added reps, and Michael kind of took off and played really, really well. So they kind of know that situation. I think that's where the trade market comes from. The cap number is actually a bargain. A player of the caliber of Michael Bennett at $7.2 million, that's a bargain. You're not going to get much back because of his age, 34, as I said, in November. But you could alleviate some of the headaches. So you have to ask a number of questions. Graham's going to be here. Barnett's going to be here. Is Chris Long going to be back? If he's not going to be back, then you need Michael Bennett. If you have Chris Long back, if you have a clearly defined role, if you want him in that role, I think you should shop Michael Bennett.
But the cap number comes the next question. They have to try to find ways to clear out money if they want to get in the LeVeon Bell sweepstakes.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be in the LeVeon Bell sweepstakes. I really don't. I think he's going to end up with the Jets. I talked about it a lot. You don't sit out a season to take less money. And the only way he's going to end up here is to leave money on the table. Now, how he would be able to do some things, $20 million is going to come off the cap immediately for Nick Foles. They've already done extensions where Jason Kelce gets more money, but on the cap short term, it's going to help the Eagles. Same with Brandon. I haven't seen Isaac numbers, but I would imagine it would be a similar situation. The cap number is not going to be bad early. That's just the way Howie works. But LeVeon Bell didn't sit out to take less money. And when you have teams like the Jets who have just gobs and gobs of cap space and are going to be willing to pay him and make him the highest paid running back, probably destroy the old record of Todd Gurley, I just don't see how the Eagles get into that equation. From a football perspective, they'd love to have him. He's exactly what they need. I just don't think it's going to happen.
By the way, it was being reported by The Athletic. The Jets, Eagles, and Bucks are expected to be among the teams interested in LeVeon Bell.
So if not Bell, John, then who at running back?
Well, you saw the combine, and the Eagles talked to every sticking running back that was there. So they're going to be uncovering every rock. They're going to be looking at free agency. There's some names in free agency that would also be an upgrade. And whether they do something in free agency or they do something in the draft, it's pretty clear they want a more at least defined lead back if they're going by committee. But the ultimate goal, and this dates back to Christian McCaffrey, they wanted him badly the year they got Derek Barnett, but he ended up being a top 10 pick. Ultimately, they do want a 3-down back, and that's what LeVeon Bell could be. And that's what a guy like McCaffrey is, but there aren't a ton of those guys. And all you can do is try to improve the position, and the Eagles will try to do that in either free agency or the draft. I just don't think they can compete with a team like the Jets who have so much cap money. For a player who has proven and said, by the way, I mean, he's kind of flirted with the Eagles over social media. And, you know, Bryce Harper has mentioned, you know, LeVeon come to Philadelphia, and all that's great, but you don't sit out a full season and leave $14.5 million on the table, tell the Pittsburgh Steelers for 2 years you want this transcendent contract, and then all of a sudden change your mind and take less money. I wish it were true. I wish it were possible for Eagles fans, but I just don't think it is.
You know, besides the obvious reason and the biggest reason being, you know, money and cap space, is it, you know, how much is it that they like the running back by committee? Is there any way they try and do that again, get a couple young guys in, get a veteran in? Like, are they planning on using multiple running backs for the foreseeable future?
Well, I don't think, you know, that's one of the things since Doug has gotten here, it's been a committee. And I think people assume they're happy with that. And you know, Doug in the past has said he doesn't have a problem doing it. He said at the Combine, we won a Super Bowl doing it. So he's comfortable doing it. But as I point out, this team has been trying in the past. They've already tried to get a 3-down back. they're only using a committee because they haven't been able to do it. And it was not only McCaffrey, it was also Dalvin Cook they tried to draft. They want a 3-down running back because that makes them a more well-rounded offense. To date, they haven't been able to get it. So if they can get one, they certainly will. If not, they'll try to upgrade the committee as best as possible.
If they were to be in play for a bigger name free agent, do you have a guy that you think that would be on that list?
Well, I don't know if you would call it big name. I think when people think big names, they think LeVeon Bells of the world. I think if they, went away from Brandon Graham and let him leave, maybe a Trey Flowers, who's probably going to get 15, maybe 16 million in free agency. But I think you have to look at the same thing they were trying to get last year with Mike Wallace. I don't know if he's a big name, but John Brown, somebody who can run at wide receiver. That's a clear need on the offensive side of the football. But this team is about, they've just shown it over the past couple of days. They build around their own. They extend Brandon Graham. They bring him back. They actually re-sign him. They extend Jason Kelce. They extend Isaac Seumalo. This team, especially now with the cap situation being what it is, probably going to kick the can down the road another year with Carson Wentz, but you don't budget with just 2019 in mind. I mean, Howie's consistent. He says you got to think about 2020, 2021, and he knows that sort of, I'll use it, even though Shander's not there, that sort of Damocles of Carson Wentz's contract, it's ever looming, whether it's signed this offseason or next offseason.
Well, yeah, and that's the NFL. I mean, can you kind of look at Brandon Graham's deal and tell us in terms of it's 3 years, $41 million, but we know in the NFL it's never 3 years, $41 million. Seumalo, same thing.
Yeah, usually NFL contracts, even the big ones, with the exception of Kirk Cousins, who got 3 years fully guaranteed. Usually those first 2 years are where the majority of the guaranteed money is, and that's what Brandon got. He essentially got 2 years, $27 million guaranteed, and then you sort of revisit things and both sides, because Brandon's not going to play that third season without some guaranteed money if he's still playing at a high level. If he's not playing at a high level, the Eagles are not going to want to pay it. So even when you see 5-year deals in free agency, really what they are is 2-year deals and essentially a series of 1-year deals when you talk about, both sides talk about if they want to continue.
John McMullen here with us, talking some NFL. A lot of it going on. We told you about Foles. Isaac Seumalo, let's bring him into the mix. Obviously, he's been an interesting guy. Started, didn't start. Warmack took over for him. Wisniewski took over for him. They went back to him. He was going to be the center. Now he's the left guard. He'll be here for 3 more years. Kind of indicates that they really like him. For the people out there who say, this guy has been inconsistent, he didn't start, he's been in and out, does he, in your opinion, has he evolved into a player that people don't that maybe take for granted or don't appreciate enough?
Well, I still think he's the weak link of that offensive line, which remains one of the best in the NFL and has. Jason Kelce's an All-Pro. Lane Johnson's an All-Pro level player, right tackle. Brandon Brooks at right guard, even though he's obviously rehabbing from the Achilles. And then Jason Peters, even at his advanced age, is still a competent left tackle, and I think that's the move. Ultimately, I think they need to restructure and get his cap number down. I think they will. Isaac's sort of the worst player on that offensive line, but I do think the Eagles think the Eagles believe he turned the corner last season. It was, remember, as a second-year player, he was kind of given the starting job. It was really bad, benched after the second game, for Chance Warmack. Ultimately, Wiz took over, and they ran to the Super Bowl. And Wiz was the starter at the beginning of last season, and it sort of flip-flopped. And Sayamalu took over after week 4, I believe, and he kind of settled in. So Jeff Stoutland's always loved him. Jeff, anytime we would ask questions about Isaac and struggling, Jeff would look at us like we're crazy. He thinks he's going to be a very good player. I don't think it's gotten to that point yet. Clearly, he improved last season. Clearly, Jeff and the Eagles believe he's going to be a good player in this league, and we'll see how he continues to develop. But there's no question they've pretty much said this is our starting left guard.
Just got this, Tim McManus, Fletcher Cox surgery on his right foot following the season. He's in recovery, and an image of him in a walking boot riding his scooter on social media over the weekend. He injured his foot in that game against the Saints, so apparently Fletcher needed to get some off-season surgery. So you got that on the defensive line. What about Jernigan? What's the deal with him?
Well, Tim's got that big number coming up March 13th. The Eagles have to make a decision. They're not going to pay him essentially $11 million. So that's another candidate. If they want him back, they have to restructure. If not, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. They're going to move on. And I wish I can give you a better answer, but remember, he barely played last year. He had the cervical essentially back. It was called back, but it was neck surgery. It was neck fusion. And he ultimately came back and then got hurt again and then was able to recover. So I'm not sure if you can count on him physically. And I think what the Eagles do on March 13th, if they restructure, they think he's a viable player from a health standpoint. He's certainly a good football player. We know that when he's able to play. The question with him are strictly health related. And if they think that neck fusion can hold up, and if they think that's worth gambling on. So that's sort of, I think, one for the doctors more than anything else, because Tim likes it here. He certainly, remember, he signed an extension before he hurt himself, a big money extension. So the Eagles liked him. He liked being here. But all the issues with Tim Jernigan are health related, and those are kind of up to the doctors, and if they believe he can stand up to the rigors of the NFL.
And lastly, this report, too, Jeff McClain, Philly.com, reporting that they are trying to extend Vitae, which, I guess he's been steady in that role. The one thing, Brian hinted at it, Graham, Sayamala, Kelce, Vitae, you're bringing the band back together, and that's great. It just reeks of a lot of loyalty that this might not go well.
Well, no, I mean, in the case of Sayamalo and Vitae, remember, I mean, that's what you do. You extend the players who think are a part of what you've done and draft picks, and they're younger, coming off their first contracts. And if you do extend them a year early, you generally get a bit of a deal. In the case of Vitae, he's not going to get a lot of money. He's going to get swing tackle, backup offensive tackle money. So I don't think that's relevant. It's more relevant with Jason and Brandon because they're over 30, and you start to question a couple things. If you get to that stage of the NFL as a veteran player plus 30, and you're an all-pro, in both the case, Jason 2 years in a row, Brandon second team all-pro, you're going to get paid a lot of money. So there is obviously a cost. This is a sport where when the decline comes,
right,
it comes pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
So,
and the Eagles, John, you know this, we're masters of knowing when Hugh Douglas couldn't play anymore, when Jeremiah Trotter couldn't play, when Vincent couldn't play, when Trey Thomas. They knew when these guys were done. The only guy I think that got wrong maybe was Dawkins.
Yeah, I don't even think they got Dawkins wrong. At least,
well, he could at least still play.
Yeah, it was clearly on the descent. In this case, though, I mean, if you look at Jason Kelce, as I mentioned, I mean, he was banged up beyond belief. Probably shouldn't have been playing with an MCL injury, and then hurt his elbow, and he was still the best center in football. So I haven't seen any decline from him. You would think he'd be healthier, if anything, next year. And Brandon was coming off. Remember, when he made the biggest play in this franchise's history, defensive play, the strip sack of Tom Brady, he was doing that on an ankle that needed surgery, and he also hurt his hamstring because he was favoring it because the ankle needed surgery. So he didn't have an off season last year after the surgery, came back and played at a high level. So I have not seen any decline from either of those two players. So it's really difficult for me to say they should give up on them because they're not. You know, Michael Bennett, we mentioned, Michael's going to be 34. Brandon, you know, is early 30s. Jason, early 30s. And that's a big difference in the NFL. You probably got 2, maybe 3 years of high-level play before the decline starts. And if you get to that position with players of that level, you got to pay them. And that's what the Eagles did.
John McMullen, a lot of Eagles stuff. Check it all out. 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. A lot of Eagles news, free agency, and more right here on the Sports Bash. We'll do it again tomorrow, pal. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike.